Hey everyone, I wanted to talk to you about Thomas More's Utopia. And let's look first at a little information about Thomas More and the time period. So Thomas More was an influential figure of the early Renaissance. He entered the service of King Henry VIII. He also went to Oxford. He was a lawyer. And he was also a Catholic and a tireless persecutor of Protestants. And he also witnessed the economic models of feudalism at the time, which Europe and England were founded on. So this feudalism meant that all the power was held by rich nobles, and peasants lived an existence where they just barely scraped by. Their existence was really just to support the nobles' way of life. So these factors play into how he came to write the book, because he disagreed with the economic systems of the time. So in the late 15th century, the Renaissance begins, and the intellectual movement known as humanism comes into play. There's an emphasis on reason and science in general during the Renaissance, and then humanism comes in, emphasizing the dignity of man and the power of reason, while still remaining really deeply committed to Christianity. But the interesting part about this is that humanists were largely secular men of letters. They weren't part of the clergy, which was typical for the time, for the clergy to be looked for as the ultimate source of guidance. So what humanism did was it helped to break the hold of the strict religious orthodoxy, and people began to look at some of these humanist thinkers for guidance. So Thomas More was friends with Erasmus, who might be considered one of the primary humanist thinkers of the time. And also another aspect of this is that humanists argued against feudalism. They felt it was one-sided, which it was, and Thomas More definitely agreed with that, having been witness especially to Henry VIII, the luxury he lived in and the plight of the peasants at the time. So he wrote Utopia in 1516, and he's trying to depict what is supposed to be the ideal human society. And the book combines humor and wittiness with humanist learning, and also inserting Christian insight into it. So let's look at the word utopia itself. It actually means no place in Greek, but when pronounced in Latin, it means good place. So the combination of these two meanings is the way we currently view the word. It's a place that does not exist, but it's also an ideal place. And even more so than Thomas More trying to write about the ideal society, he was responding to his specific time in history. He was holding up a literary mirror for English society to reflect upon itself and the way it was functioning. And one thing to note is that the book was a huge success in More's lifetime, so people really enjoyed the ideas he was presenting. So here's some of the questions More asks in the book. In general, are the laws of a nation or a government virtuous? Are they grounded in the principles they claim to hold as a Christian nation? So in other words, are the laws genuine, or are they hypocritical? Next, he is looking not just to critique the government, but also calling for a reform, because he wants to have justice. He wants to have these universal virtues that are grounded in Christianity. So he's inviting people in power through this story to reflect on what good governance means and what their goals are as a government. Now, one of the solutions he has in the story, which is unorthodox, is communistic living. So this is the abolishment of private property, which an idea which was around as early as some of Plato's texts. So More would have been familiar with that idea. And so you can see in the story how he's setting this up, and he feels that without private property, people would not become greedy. In addition, he's satirizing his own society because he sees the avarice of the ruling class, the rich ones, the 1%, that their greed is endangering the good of everyone else. So the main character here in the story is Raphael Hythloday, and here's one of his quotes that represents the same idea. It says, "But as a matter of fact, to tell you what I really think, as long as you have private property, and as long as money is the measure of all things, it is scarcely ever possible for a commonwealth to be just or happy." So More is arguing that private property is creating greed and making it impossible for justice or happiness to exist in the world. So he's also suggesting another humanist point, that we have to live as Christians, and to do that in all forms, whether we are in power or not, and to look at our purpose through the eyes of our own humanity. So if we can look at others through the lens of humanity, the rules we'll make, the rules we live by, the rules the government will make, will be beneficial for all. Now the next question he's asking, and this is also related to religion and Christianity, but he wants people to examine the role of pleasure in their lives. So many people, he says, feel pleasure is just the idea of joy for the body instead of joy for the soul. So he speaks of the people of Utopia as being guided by pleasure, but he thinks that people in general are misguided because they do place pleasure in the hands of wealth instead of doing good for others, sacrificing for others, having that Christian direction that will bring true joy in the end. And so that's another one of his underlying messages is about pleasure. And he says it's through the pursuit of what gives us the greatest delight, as reflected by our own nature as human beings. So through this story, he's asking people to follow the Christian life in multiple ways, in everyday living, so that they can practice things that bring joy to themselves, but to apply that idea of pleasure to government as well, so that those in power aren't so focused on wealth and greed to give them pleasure, but instead on those Christian values that will bring good to all. So as you read the story, see if you can notice More's message there, and I look forward to seeing your comments on this.